We have more for your ears only. I'm Eddie Robinson.
I'm David Alpern with this quote from the news. "We are not satisfied with the American answers." That was Jamalal Abdurrauf al-Hari, a Syrian refugee in a Jordanian camp visited by Secretary of State John Kerry as Assad regime forces reasserted their military edge. Kerry also announced plans for new Israeli-Palestinian peace talks, and Jerusalem was expected to release prisoners as a goodwill gesture. Now this.
But I think it's going to be something that is good for the Senate. It is a compromise. And I think we get what we want, and they get what they want. Not a bad deal.
Let me tell you, as one who has fought Patriot Act fights, usually against the people over on the other side of the aisle, Section 215 expires at the end of 2015. And unless you realize you got a problem, that is not going to be renewed.
We know that Obamacare is going to harm our health care, raise our costs, and that's what you're seeing today in a bipartisan move inside of Congress.
There were new signs of bipartisanship in Washington last week, some more rhetorical than real. Thanks to Republican stalwart John McCain, Senate Democratic leader Harry Reid announced a deal on long-delayed White House nominations that avoided a so-called nuclear option to restrict use of filibuster. But few saw it as a template for further compromise. In the House, Wisconsin's James Sensenbrenner did reflect growing Republican and Democratic doubts about extensive phone and email surveillance by the National Security Agency under the Patriot Act. But the 38th House vote against Obamacare, specifically delayed the insurance mandates for both business and individuals, was still a GOP-led mission, despite the support of a score or more Democrats cited by California Republican Kevin McCarthy.
And that House move stood little chance of getting by the Senate or the White House. To talk more about the week's political developments, we're joined again by TV commentator Eleanor Clift, also a contributor at NewsweekDailyBeast.com. Welcome back to the program.
Glad to be with you.
We've just finished a segment on the George Zimmerman not guilty verdict, and I wonder what your reaction was to President Obama's comments. Some saw a very personal leadership on the issue of race in America. Others saw him tipping the scale on a continuing controversy.
Well, I thought that his silence for the better part of a week was telling, that this was a debate, conversation that was going on throughout the country, and the black community in particular was in a great deal of pain over the way that the decision was handed down. It was like the elephant in the room, and I think he really did have to address it. And it was a big surprise to have him come into the briefing room unannounced. I don't think that's ever happened before. And to deliver, I think he spoke for almost 20 minutes without notes and without a teleprompter in an expression of how he sees the situation that he'd obviously been thinking about for some time. I thought it was extraordinary, and that school children will be reading this in future generations. I think it's one of the markers in his presidency, and I think he had a message of healing. Although I do see that some people who I hate to say this is Zimmerman side and a Trayvon Martin side, but that seems to be how it's breaking down. People on the Zimmerman side felt that he was remiss in not offering sympathy to Zimmerman and his family, and the difficulties that they face in the aftermath of this verdict as well. But he sketched out a very personal journey that he's been on, that most black men have been on, and I think white America needed to hear it, and certainly black America needed to hear it too. The first black president, just could not sit silent throughout this.
Talk about the deal on White House nominations and how McCain came to sidestep Senate GOP leader Mitch McConnell.
Well, Mitch McConnell is running for re-election, and I think he really doesn't mind stepping aside and letting someone else do the deal-making. And he's been leading a caucus that has basically said no to everything on the Democratic side. And I think John McCain saw a void there. I think what happened is as much about John McCain as it is about Mitch McConnell. I think McCain wants to be seen as a player on Capitol Hill, not just someone who goes on talk shows and shoots his mouth off. And he's now inserted himself in a very constructive way in a number of battles, including immigration reform, and now this compromise to avoid a real showdown in the Senate. And I think Mitch McConnell loses ground, and the result is that we've got, probably a dozen or more Republicans who are basically saying they've had enough of his totally obstructionist leadership. So I think there's a real civil war going on within the larger Republican Party, but it's now happening among Senate Republicans as well.
But do you see the Reid-McCain deal breaking the partisan logjam on other key issues?
Well, they did pass an immigration bill, and so that's good. Now, whether this will hold or form any kind of template for the budget fights ahead, I'm not so sure. But it did avoid what could have been a real contest on nominations, and that could have just eaten up all the Senate time. And they're in effect trying to run out the clock and deny this president and the country, really, any constructive effort on a whole range of issues. So this is a breakthrough, but it's very hard to say whether it's simply just a one-off or whether it does provide a template for what you could call Republican entrepreneurship in the future. I mean, this allows some Republicans to break out of the lockstep that McConnell has had them in.
Well, looking at the House, what's your latest reading on immigration reform there? Some GOP leaders continue to say it's essential to the party's prospects as the Hispanic vote increases. Others seem to doubt they have a chance of winning much of that vote, whatever they do.
Well, I think there are two options. One, that there's enough outside pressure from the Chamber of Commerce, from agricultural groups, from the high-tech industry. All these very powerful sectors want immigration reform, and they're going to bring pressure on House Republicans. And then the second path is if John Boehner in the House is willing to put a bill on the floor that will not get a majority of Republicans, but would get a majority of Democrats, and with some Republicans could form a majority. He's done it before. He could do it again. This White House has virtually no leverage over House Republicans. Most House Republicans don't even know who to deal with in the White House, not that they would want to. And it feels as though the White House has just given up on applying any kind of pressure because they don't really have any leverage. So I'm looking for the outside groups to really put the squeeze on House Republicans through contributions, through appealing to the better angels of their nature, and to appealing to the overall livelihood of the Republican Party, which if they vote against this, I think will really come back to hurt them, not only in the next election, but as a potentially majority party who wants to win the White House again. It would be a huge blow.
TV commentator Eleanor Clift is also a contributor at NewsweekDailyBeast.com.
Quote from the news, "The worst thing we can do is ignore the problem." That was Sandy K. Barua, president of the Detroit Regional Chamber, after the city, facing at least $18 billion of debt, declared the largest municipal bankruptcy in U.S. history. A state judge later blocked it as unconstitutional, but state officials said they would appeal that decision.
Next, cancer, chemo, and Alzheimer's. For your ears only.